Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, thanks, Wayne, for the introduction. So yeah, this is part of a larger project measuring farmland loss in partnership with OMAFRA. So thank you very much for their support. So the topic of this research was surplus resident severances and small lot creation in Ontario's prime agriculture areas. Next slide. So the research objective that we had was to review issues, opportunities, and policy considerations related to two types of severances that are often debated in rural Ontario. So the first was for a dwelling that is surplus to a farm area, and the second is for a smaller or an undersized parcel for agriculture purposes to accommodate beginning farmers or niche forms of agriculture. And when I say undersized, I mean smaller than the standard minimum lot size for an agriculture severance that is typical within that distinct jurisdiction. So the purpose of this research was to gain a better understanding of current policy's appropriateness for farmland preservation and the relevance of these policies in meeting the needs of the farming community. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to start off by giving a bit of background information on the two types of severances that we were examining. So the first being a severance for a residence that is surplus to a farming operation. So a residence surplus to a farming operation is defined by the provincial policy statement as an existing habitable farm residence that is rendered surplus as a result of consolidation. So the acquisition of two additional farm parcels to be operated as one farm operation. And the image on the right here is an example of that. So the area in beige would be the severed land that would be attached, would be conjoining another farm parcel, and the little blue section there would be the residential lot that is going to be severed. So this type of severance has been contentious subject for some time. Within current Ontario provincial policy, they are the only type of severance permitted for the creation of a residential lot in prime agriculture areas, and the allowance of this type of severance continues to be debated on its contribution to the protection of agriculture communities, built heritage, and the protection of Ontario's agriculture land base. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about smaller lot creation for new and niche farmers and the discussion around this and why looking at this is important. So provincial and local policy generally restricts farm severances to large parcels. So this is typically around 100 acres, which reflects the original settlement patterns of rural Ontario. And severances for smaller farm parcels are generally not permitted. There has, however, been pressure in parts of the province to allow smaller parcels to accommodate beginning farmers and niche farming operations. So a number of factors can be seen to have contributed to an interest in this analysis. First of all, the rising price of agricultural land, current farm operations increasingly lacking farm succession plans, and the diversification of types of farming operations. So when we talk about niche farming, we can include greenhouse operations, market gardens, herb and fiber production, and different specialty crops. So often these operations don't rely on large acreage for production. And these types of operations are becoming more popular, and new farmers are increasingly coming from non-generational farming backgrounds. So there is a need to assess whether there is demand and reasoning for smaller lot creation to support these types of operations. So our research reflected in this report looks at the applicability of current provincial and regional minimum lot size policy in particular in supporting new and niche farming operations. So next slide, please. So the way we approached this research was really in three distinct steps. So the first was to review current provincial and regional policies in Southern Ontario. So this included the provincial policy statement, the Greenbelt Plan and other provincial plans, as well as 17 regional official plans. The second step was to do a number of workshops with the farming community And then the third was a set of interviews with regional municipal planning departments in Southern Ontario. Next slide. So the first step was really to look at provincial policy. So I just wanted to outline a few key points in the provincial policy statement regarding these two types of severances. So there's a number of different types of severances allowed within prime agriculture areas, two of which are for the surplus farm dwelling severance, and the second is for agriculture uses. So pertinent for the surplus farm dwelling operation severance, policy requires that the resultant residential lot must be a minimum size needed to accommodate the use and appropriate sewer and water services. As well, the other lot that's severed must prohibit any new dwellings. And then for agriculture use severances, lots must be a size appropriate for the type of agriculture uses common in that area and sufficiently large enough to maintain future flexibility for future changes in the type of size of operation, agriculture operations. But as well, in prime agriculture areas, all types, sizes, and intensities of agriculture uses and normal farm practices are promoted. Sorry, there's a little message popping up on my screen. Shall be promoted and protected in accordance with provincial policy standards. So these are the two pieces of policy within the provincial policy statement that are really pertinent in understanding the current landscape around the ability to allow smaller lots. Next slide, please. So through our review of regional policies, a few key themes came out. So in terms of surplus residential severances, the way that municipalities had taken this policy and either directly implemented what the PPS had said or had put different variations or spins on it were sort of quantified and assessed. So a few things came out. First of all, there was some variation in definition of farm consolidation. So this can either be allowing only to abutting farm parcels to qualify, or the idea that perhaps like the parcels do not have to be abutting, they can be in different areas. Secondly, also the definition of a farm owner or what types of operations were eligible for this type of severance varied. And third, perhaps the most prominent variation we noted was the requirement for a dwelling age on the dwelling that was to be severed. So this could either be an age or an amount of time that the dwelling had to have been already established. As well, we did see some variation in the residential lot size. So generally, we would see this would be around 0.8 hectares, but some municipalities indicated an exact amount and others didn't, and others allowed smaller sizes or larger. So in terms of smaller lot creation, some of the key themes and variation we noted were that municipalities either implemented on a regional level a minimum lot size for agriculture severances, or they allowed local municipalities to direct what minimum lot size they would like to see in their jurisdiction. And thirdly, we saw the appropriateness of severances for smaller lots were being determined by conformity with the provincial policy statements addressed in particular. So the other thing we saw is that some municipalities did in fact permit smaller lots. And in these cases, they were generally along the lines of either needing to still conform with provincial policy, as I discussed earlier, or the other variation was if the operation was deemed viable, if it had been assessed as being viable, or if it was a sustainable farming operation. And thirdly, some municipalities also noted that they did have existing undersized parcels. Next slide, please. So I'll just go over some of the key themes that we saw within the community farming workshops. So within our workshops, we really looked to get an idea of what were the thoughts and about these two types of severances within the farming community, and specifically what were the benefits that they perceived and what were the concerns and disadvantages of these severances. So for surplus resident severances, some of the benefits noted were the economic benefits. So really the ability of farmers to realize the value of their house by being able to sever it. And the second was really giving farmers an option to sever the house if it was undesired. So one of the things noted was that many people didn't want to be a landlord. So this gave the option to sell the house and not have to do that instead of bulldozing it. And one of the key considerations is really the ability of this type of severance to support multi-generational farm succession and also equity planning for farmers. At the same time, some of the main concerns noted were loss of farmland to residential development and specifically estate development. So the ability of these residential lots to then have larger houses built on top of them, the potential for multiple severances, and also the potential for conflict between residents that are moving into agriculture areas and the existing agriculture operations. So some of the key themes we found around the discussion on smaller lot creation were some of the benefits were really the ability for these types of severances to support the diversification and intensification of agriculture that was deemed necessary going into the future, as well as the ability for these types of severances and these smaller types of agriculture operations to support tourism in the area. So bringing people and money into the region, as well as supporting residents. So increasing servicing and as well as increasing job creation in the area. But there were also a number of concerns noted, specifically the contribution of these types of severances to farmland fragmentation. So really cutting up farmland into small parcels. And also there was concern over the questionability of, are these operations viable? And that's immediately, but also into the long term. So what's the longevity of these operations and what happens if these operations fail? So part of that was really concern over, again, estate development, and so if we allow all of these smaller lots, eventually will they just end up becoming estates? Or also hobby farms, even if the intent is perhaps to have an agriculture operation, what is in place there to ensure that continues into the future? And again, challenges that can happen between new operations and existing operations as well. So MDS concerns. Next slide, please. So the third piece was municipal interviews. So it was a really great time to be doing this type of research with municipalities, because a lot of the municipalities interviewed were in the process of going through and creating a new official plan or doing a 5-year review. So I really got to get a feel of sort of policy directions, where municipalities were heading with these two types of severances. So some of the direction that municipalities were taking for surplus residential severances really divided either into creating more restrictive policy to limit the amount of severances that were happening because it was seen that there was already too many happening, or creating more lenient policy to better support agriculture communities. So one of the main things we saw, again, was the dwelling age requirement. So municipalities implementing a minimum age the dwelling had to be. But again, this varied very much based on region. And then in terms of more lenient policies, we saw mentioned that being more lenient on the residential lot size. So this would be to accommodate different environmental features or different other attributes on the property already, as well as creating policies and more leniency around secondary uses. So as while the main use of that property might be residential, this would be more in terms of allowing home industry and other types of uses on the property, as well as ways in which these types of severances can really foster heritage farm building preservation. And then in terms of smaller lot creation, the discussion was really around looking at, are there already lots? You know, are there small lots within municipalities already? And in fact, we found that a number of municipalities have in fact done a small lot inventory in their jurisdiction. But at the same time, while we found that there were a number of smaller lots, a number of questions also came up in this discussion. Particularly, are the locations of these lots desirable for new operations? Are these lots suitable for operations? So is this land arable? And also, are these lots accessible and available? So are they on the market? Is there a lot of competition for other types of estate development or hobby farms? And are these lots actually being used for agriculture? As well, another consideration we found was that demand also varied. We saw that demand for these types of operations also varied by location. So perhaps near more urban centers and areas that attracted organic and more creative farming operations, the demand in the future for these types of severances might be higher. And then the third thing to really note is that because of sort of somewhat fluctuation in provincial policy, municipalities were really facing challenges on how to implement these types of policies, how to create policies that would in fact allow smaller lot creations, and how do we do this? And one of the main questions was really about how do we assess eligibility? So who should be allowed to apply for these types of severances, and how do we do that? So I'll just go to the next slide, please. Has the slide changed? So it has, oh, there, perfect, thank you. So my last slide is just some of the outcomes of this research and sort of the direction we see, potential direction for policy based on our results. So in terms of surplus residential severances, some of the considerations would be perhaps establishing a minimum age requirement for the house to be severed. So this would limit sort of cumulative severance issues that have been seen in some regions. Also, the idea of allowing some sort of flexibility in the size of the severed lot, perhaps the province promoting the preservation of heritage buildings through these types of severances, and a little bit of direction on sort of how to define eligibility. So who should be able to apply for these types of severances so that they are in fact contributing to the agriculture community, and recommendations on secondary uses for residential properties as well. And so also for small lot creation, some of the policy directions we noted were really, while there were a number of smaller lots noted by municipalities, we recommended working with the province and really creating a province-wide inventory of these lots, you know, and this also involved, like, what do these lots look like? Are they arable? Are they available? As well as analyzing opportunities in perhaps rural areas as well. So are there smaller lots in rural areas, not just prime agriculture land? And assessing the affordability of these existing small lots and parcels. Another key consideration that was noted in a couple of interviews, as well as the farming workshops, was really looking at alternatives to small lot creation as well. So this can be leasing arrangements or mentorship programs. And then lastly, also, if we're looking at creating policies to allow smaller lots, taking into consideration that these types, the demand might vary by location, and if so, figuring out sort of eligibility requirements for this. So thank you. That's our